My name is Ryan Beam, and I'm a student at the University of Kentucky studying economics and statistics. In this series, I'm just trying to explore how data is applied in real-world settings and how the field is continuing to evolve. Today, I'm joined by Abe Gong, a technical founder and advisor who co-founded Great Expectations, one of the most widely used data quality tools in the world. And he now works with startups and teams thinking about things like data, AI, and product development and strategy. Abe, thank you so much for meeting with me.
Yeah, Brian, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Just to kind of start us off, looking at your overarching career, you've moved through things like research, data science, healthcare, consumer products, and eventually founding and leading Great Expectations. So, just kind of looking back, was there any through line that kind of connected all of those different things?
I think if, yeah, I think if I'm looking for one thing, it's figuring stuff out. I think the areas that have drawn me are places that are complicated and in motion, and figuring out how to get the right moving parts to fit together just takes real craft. And then if I go one step further, most of the problems that I've been most interested in have both a human component, something about communication or user experience, or something about just like how it feels to interact with the system. And then I've also had some kind of a deeply technical component where you have to figure out the right primitives and abstractions or data models, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And kind of leading off that into my next question, there was a keynote that you gave in 2014 that talked about building for resilience. So I was just curious because a lot has changed since 2014. So I was curious in today's climate, today's world, especially with the rise of AI, how do you think? What do you think about building for resilience now? What do you think that looks like now and in the future?
Yeah, that it's funny. I have not thought about that talk in a while. I was at Jawbone at the time. We were making basically computers you could wear on your wrist for basically the first time. It's like us and Fitbit. Nobody else was doing it then. This is before Apple Watch. And so figuring out how you could take a computer into the shower or a computer into a weight room or things like that, like you had to think about resilience there. So that Yeah, that question I was asking sort of from an Internet of Things, like wearable computing perspective. I actually think that the whole AI era is bringing that back up again, but in a new way. Because now we have very, well, compared to anything we had previously, very smart computers, but they're non-deterministic, right? Like they're much more flexible, but everything they do is somewhat random. And so building a reliable process that includes random parts as one of its components, yeah, I actually think there are a whole bunch of really interesting questions about what does it mean for AI to be resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked a little bit about building a reliable system there. And to me, that's part of what Great Expectations was about. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But
No, you're exactly right there.
and so when you started Great Expectations, like what was it? Was it that there weren't reliable data, governing platforms at the time, or what kind of drove that decision-making process to go that route?
Yeah, that's right. I think I was seeing that one very much from the inside because I at that point I'd been leading data teams mostly at growing companies for several years, and every single one of them had a problem with data quality, and the problems were different, right? It depended on the shape of the system and where we got data from, what we were using it for. But in each case, making sure that the right rows were in the right columns and had the right values, some version of that ended up being problematic. So, yeah, you're 100% right to tie that back to resilience. It was about like the individual level pain points were things like, I don't want my analysis to break in ways that I can't explain. Well, I don't want it to break at all, but if it has to break, I want to be able to explain why it broke,
Right.
right? And explain what was happening upstream in my data system or things like that. And yeah, so Great Expectations was a good fix for that. But if you step away from the role of the data scientist or the data engineer and just look at the system, yeah, it's totally a tool for better resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that for me. So, just kind of moving on to more of another more broader question, and because you've worked across analytics, machine learning, and now AI more broadly. So, as tools become more powerful, what human judgment or intuition do you think really matters more now and not less?
I I mean, I think that's a $1 trillion question, and I actually don't know that anybody has a great answer for it yet. Um, just to give some glimmers that I'm seeing. Almost all of the time, if I can turn something into a repeatable process where I'm classifying things or scoring things or things like that, I actually don't have any good examples where I've been able to do that. Uh, and a computer hasn't been able to do the same thing, as long as I'm able to kind of put all the important context on the screen.
Right.
Um, so there are an awful lot of those types of tasks that seem like machines, if we take the time to get them the right context and train them, they can think the way we think they are. On the other hand, there's something about refactoring code or figuring out how to take a bunch of pre-writing and turn that into sort of like the best argument to put into an essay, or like the most persuasive way to approach a sales call, something like that. That I don't think AI is good at yet. There's something around this kind of more holistic figuring out how the parts fit together that it's not great at yet. And yeah, there are other things too, but those two things, at least, it feels like one's pretty firmly on the AI is good at this side of the line, and the other one, lots of examples where AI doesn't seem to be very good at it yet.
Right. And kind of speaking on what AI is good at and what it isn't good at now, if you don't mind me asking, how are you using AI in your career or life in general at the moment?
Yeah, I think it shows up in kind of two faces. So one is just kind of everyday person. I have a subscription. Well, I'm a geek and I like trying out the tools. So I've got one to like all three of the major models, and I'll ask it questions and brainstorm. And that goes from everything from like researching speakers to buy for a home theater to researching, like looking up local restaurants that'd be interesting to go to even things like I wouldn't say therapy, but like thinking through, I don't know, tough problems, like parenting things, like uh yeah, just questions where it's useful to be able to have some back and forth. It's not like I'm turning to the computer as an oracle for those things, but it's useful to have a sounding board, and I think AI is at a point where it can do that. So, that's one category, and I do a decent amount there. The other one that I'm doing a lot of right now, since I'm early stage on a new startup and I'm doing a lot of engineering work, is coding. And
Mhm.
so, figuring out how to do the whole vibe coding thing, but do it effectively so that you get useful, durable code. That's there's a whole set of really interesting questions around how that field is evolving.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you brought up the whole vibe coding thing because I've always had, an interest in programming and coding, but I never really got too deep into it until college. And then
Mhm.
AI explodes, and it's hard to balance, learning to code and program and these things along with AI and what AI is able to do now. So do you have any guidance on, how I can not fall behind in using those tools, but also still gain the needed knowledge I'll need to go forward within the field of programming and using that tool.
I'm pretty skeptical of one size fits all guidance. So let me ask you a couple questions. Like,
Okay.
what kinds of things are you using AI for yourself?
Yeah, well, just generally, well, in my more general life, I've used it to just kind of organize things, like you said, general advice and questions along those lines. But in the more professional coding aspect of things, a lot of just planning, mainly, especially because I haven't built many projects, and especially in the beginning when you're learning to code, you want to build. And so
Mhm.
I have all these really cool ideas and all these cool problems to solve that I want to build around. And I think AI has been really good in taking where I'm at and, bringing me up to what I need to build these cool things. But, like I recently I have a small e-commerce business, and it helped me create a database, then host it to AWS, and build a platform around that. And that is something that, without AI kind of walking me through some of those things, it would have been, I would have spent 5 or 6 hours just reading documentation. So I think
Mhm.
it's really sped things up like that. But then in just like building things in general is something I want to do a lot of going forward. I want to be a builder. So that's been a hard thing to navigate is how much to give AI to build and like, allow myself to still learn those skills.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. What? Can you just say a little bit more about like what your workflow is, like which tools and how you
Oh
use them?
yeah. So really, I've kind of like you, I've explored a lot of. I had subscriptions to ChatGPT, Gemini, and currently Gemini is free for students for a year. So I currently have Gemini,
Mm-hmm.
but Claude Code is what I use the majority of
Mm-hmm.
the time, just because I found it the best in my experience, and it's been the easiest for me to learn. So that's what I really do is I just go through Claude Code, Visual Studio, build things out, usually through Python. That's the language I have the most experience with, and I'm still trying to
Hmm.
navigate as well. But if that
Are
answers your
you
question,
no, that's perfect. Are you using it with GitHub or you
yes,
mentioned AWS before?
yes, I'm using it with
Yeah.
GitHub.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't, I haven't seen anybody who's put together kind of a good curriculum for this, but what I'm seeing is um, agents are very good at syntax, right? Like they're good at figuring out where the semicolon goes and all of those things that used to be a huge part of what you had to learn in order to code effectively. Um, Now you sometimes need that if you're kind of like dropping in to look and understand if code is right and doing some debugging. But I actually don't, I spend very little time with syntax. Like actually, case in point, the application I'm building right now is built in TypeScript. I had never touched TypeScript until a year ago. And now, between me and Claude, like, well, oh, and an engineer I'm working with, like we've written tens of thousands of lines of code, right? So like if you took that away from me, I think I would probably not be great at this TypeScript syntax, but it also doesn't matter very much, right? Because that's not the level that it's my job to think out. Um, I think that the things that I think are becoming important are all the things that were sort of like the architectural decisions and the workflow decisions between syntax. So I think thinking through your testing strategy actually matters a lot in this world. Thinking through which parts of your code base are reusable. And then making smart decisions about, okay, if I'm just hacking on something, I probably don't have to worry too much about code quality. But if I build something to the point that I'm now using it for things and I want to build other stuff on top of it, okay, it's probably better to go back now and make sure that I have well-factored components and testable interfaces and things like that. So those are all things that were part of the craft of coding before and important ones, but I think they've gone from being 5%, 10% of what you were thinking about before, where most of it was just how do I make the code work, to the point where the code just sort of works mostly. And so thinking about how the system should be structured and how you make sure that it really is working, which I guess is another resilience question. Not that I was trying to go there, but like that's the level of thinking that I see being really valuable.
Yeah,
So that's a maybe more than you wanted on the
no,
topic.
absolutely. That's super helpful, and I will definitely dive into that, as I reflect on our conversation, because that's something I've been thinking a lot about, and it's really good to hear your perspective. Now, kind of moving off of, you mentioned, you're in the startup phase that you're building with right now. So I know you advise startups and portfolio companies on, data and things like that. So my question is, what mistakes do you see these early teams repeatedly make, or even mistakes that you've fallen into? That you have learned from throughout your time in these early startup stage of companies.
There are so many. There's so many, right? Like the vast majority of startups, like all startups struggle. Most of them fail, right? Depending on your definition of failure, but like from the perspective of a business, like does it turn into a money-making going concern? Most startups fail, and like a large fraction of them fail for self-inflicted reasons. Not all of them. Sometimes it's unanticipated market risks and things. Um, I don't think it's not a short list. I think every different type of founder has their own kind of strengths and weaknesses. And I think you can kind of like often you can extrapolate from somebody's background and see what are they likely to make mistakes on. So sometimes you'll see teams of business people that don't have any engineers. They're probably going to struggle with product engineering. Sometimes you see teams where you have engineers who've never managed people, and they're probably going to struggle with organization building. And it's just tricky because there are 100 things that have yeah, it's probably on that order. There are dozens of things that have to go right to get to the point where you're a viable business, let alone a venture scale like billion-dollar business. And if you get any of those wrong and don't figure it out fast enough, that'll kill the business. So it's not a short list.
Right. That's really interesting to hear, especially because I know, like, most businesses and startups fail. So it's interesting to hear your perspective as somebody who's worked through a lot of that. So now, kind of just as we look toward closing, so you've scaled. Now, after stepping back from some major companies and roles, what kinds of problems or ideas excite you most right now?
I'm sorry, I'm like hesitating in the beginning of every question because I want to give an honest answer. I'm interested in AI, obviously, coming from like a machine learning and data
Mhm.
background. Um, I'm really interested in the questions of how AI is going to end up reshaping organizations. So, um, yeah, for example, on my whiteboard, I've got a thing that says like Coase theorem plus AI. Like, where is that going? Right? Like, sudden, like, uh, anyway, like all these economic forces, but even more than that, all these like organizational forces of how people work together. It has to change now that we've got this new kind of intelligence in the room. But I think we're still very early days for understanding how that's going to change. So yeah, a lot of what I'm doing is trying to bring different lenses to those questions as you see AI get adopted in a lot of places to understand kind of at a more deeper structural level how is that going to affect uh, well the world we live in, but like more specifically what it means to be part of a team or to work within an organization when a lot of the like previously the only way to get work done was human beings thinking plus maybe some software plus factories and physical manufacturing, and now all of a sudden we've got something that um, it doesn't think the same way that we do, but it is intelligent in some of the same ways that we are, and yeah, just understanding the economics and the psychology of that I think can be really interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting, and especially kind of the economic side that I'm exploring in college. I think that side of things is very interesting, and kind of moving off that evolving field and evolving world. If you were in my shoes, 19 years old, studying economics, statistics, interested in data, and trying to decide, what path I should go down, where I should dive into my career, things like that, what general advice would you give me?
Are there major branches that you've thought about there, like different career paths or different areas?
I've thought a lot about data engineering, has been one that I've thought a lot about. But just in
Mhm.
general, the data science, data analysis, and a lot of that I know is changing with AI, and so that's something that I'm thinking about. But just data in general has really interested me. And honestly, if I could do it all one endpoint to the end, that would be super fun in general. So, but data
Mhm.
engineering is probably where my mind's currently at, but I'm still exploring.
Got it. I, I mean, giving you instruction on like, hey, you should go down this path. I'll hold back from doing that, but I can talk about like what I'm seeing with data engineering as a role specifically. Um, a little bit like what we talked about with software engineering a minute ago. Data engineering is interesting because a lot of it has been basic stuff like syntax or syntax like SQL or Terraform or things of that nature. And that's being commoditized very quickly. It also traditionally has been quite a hard skill to learn, right? Like getting to the point where you're very good at SQL was the kind of thing that, like, even if you were smart, it would take several years to ramp up to the point, or like smart and dedicated and very much focused on it. So it's hard. And now I think syntax is being commoditized there. Also, a lot of the system requirements for kind of the plumbing type work that has been a big part of data engineering. So specifying ELT jobs or building last mile queries to get the right analytics out. Those, because you've got a well specified input and a well specified output, those are things that I think agents are probably going to be good at before long. So I'd be wary about trying to build a career that's just that.
Okay.
On the other hand, thinking about like how information flows through organizations and through systems, and thinking about kind of like what's the right way to organize that, that's a pretty deep, complex skill set. It's not something that I see being commoditized right away. Now, like if we get to the point where we have computers that are smart enough to do any white collar job, then I don't even know what to tell you at that point. Um, but at least right now, that type of kind of architecture, organization building, like that level of thinking, that doesn't seem to be a commodity. And my guess is it's complementary to so many other things that are happening with AI. So, I mean, things are evolving really fast, but I think probably I would guess the next 5 to 10 years, barring some huge breakthrough in artificial, AGI type
Mhm.
AI, I would guess that's a reasonably good bet. I, or maybe another way of putting it is that's why I'm putting a lot of my chips in terms of
Yeah.
thinking things I'm thinking about investing in. But also, like, it's an interesting time, but it's a little bit of a scary time because so much is up for grabs now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot that I'm working to navigate as, getting thrown into college during this time. It's exciting, like you said. It's there's a lot of cool stuff to explore, but I'm also trying to figure it all out. So, yeah, I really appreciate, you taking the time to speak with me today. So thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. You've asked great questions.
I appreciate it.